Welcome back, everybody. This week, we're taking a look at Andy Warhol, and in particular, we're looking at his Shot Marilyn's set. I'm going to start with a quote from Andy Warhol himself. He says, "How can you say one style is better than another? You ought to be able to be an abstract expressionist next week, or a pop artist, or a realist, without feeling you've given up something." I think that would be so great to be able to change styles. And I think that's what's going to happen. That's going to be the whole new scene. Andy Warhol was the most successful and highly paid commercial illustrator in New York, even before he began to make art destined for galleries. Nevertheless, his screen printed images of Marilyn Monroe, soup cans, and sensational newspaper stories quickly became synonymous with pop art. He emerged from the poverty and obscurity of an Eastern European immigrant family in Pittsburgh to become a charismatic magnet for bohemian New York and to ultimately find a place in the high circles of society. So this piece we're taking a look at is called Shot Marilyn's, and he did this in 1964. So Andy Warhol worked in what was called the factory. He collaborated with a lot of different filmmakers, artists, writers, painters, photographers, you name it, in this factory during the day. It was located on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Warhol would frequently throw rowdy parties at his loft. He would invite celebrities and other well-known figures in New York in the art scene. These parties became the place to be in the 1960s and were a hotspot for the fun-loving counterculture that was sweeping the nation. During the day, the factory was always buzzing with artists collaborating with Warhol, right? The photographers, writers, and other creative people. Shortly after painting, the set we saw is five Marilyns in 1964. One of his photographer friends named Billy visited the factory with a woman named Dorothy Podbear. Now, Podbear was a performance artist and collaborator with artists like Ray Johnson. These are just really well-known artists in the 1960s in New York, okay? So the story goes that Podbear saw the Marilyns, these set of paintings or screen prints, lined up against the studio wall. And Podbear went ahead and asked Warhol if she could, quote, shoot them. Warhol, believing that she meant shooting photographs of the works, he of course said, "Yeah, go for it. Take some shots of them." Podbear then apparently peeled off her white gloves and pulled out a revolver from her bag and shot the Marilyn canvases right in the forehead of the portraits. The bullet only went through 4 of the 5 canvases and subsequently created the work's Warhol titles, Shot Marilyn's. So pretty wild story of how he got a name for some of his pieces here. Now here are some modern day takes on pop art, right? Bright colors, repeated patterns, screen printed. So here's the man himself. Here's Andy with his Brillo boxes. The Brillo boxes, he did these in 1964, and it's silk screened on plywood. So this man worked with a lot of silk screening. They are sculptures that can be arranged in various ways in the gallery. Yet each of the boxes he created, they're exactly the same. None is better than one another, right? So rather than this creating a series that is slightly different from one another, like a lot of other famous artists did, Warhol made the point that these products are all exactly the same. And in his opinion, they're all equally beautiful. Making these items in the factory, right, that we talked about earlier, his like art studio, Warhol is making fun of the art world and poking fun at like the quote artists and creators of the time by taking it not as seriously. Here's some more pop art that Andy Warhol created. This is of Elvis, right? And this image, the image used, was one taken from a publicity still from the 1960s film titled Flaming Star. In this photo, you can see Elvis Presley is dressed as a cowboy and has a gun drawn rather than the usual guitar in his hands. This Warhol's intent behind this was to depict Elvis as an actor rather than to portray him as the musician we all know him as. This is Andy's second time at the Zaxo. Weird way to say this. The previous time Andy Warhol did this gallery, it was when he debuted this Campbell soup cans a year prior. So this is his follow-up to his soup cans. Another picture of the man himself in the 60s in New York City. Gosh, this guy was cool. All right, everybody. Here is the piece we're recreating this week. This is the Shot Marilyns. I'm excited to see what you do with it, and I hope you learned a little something about Andy Warhol. Talk to you soon.